Good morning. My name is Doug Dorch, minister at Captiva Chapel by the Sea. Thank you for joining me today as we look at another devotion. This morning, I'm going to read a passage for you from the Gospel of Luke, the 9th chapter, and it's the 62nd verse where Jesus has engaged a number of people and he has spoken with them about discipleship, and they've all made excuses, and Jesus replied to the last of them, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God." Jim Rohn was one of the pioneers of motivational speaking in the last century, and like most motivational speakers, Rohn had his share of famous quotes, but the one that will always stand out to me is his quote, "If you really want to do something, you'll find a way. And if you don't, well, then you'll find an excuse." You know, some of us have made an art form out of crafting an excuse to get out of stuff that we really don't want to do. We become so proficient at making excuses that we can come up with a reason to get out of almost anything, even the harsh demands of following Jesus. But what we fail to understand is that even when our excuses for not following Jesus make perfect sense to us, Jesus sees through those excuses, and he will not let us hide behind them in the least, which is one of the lessons that we can glean from that passage I read for you from Luke's Gospel. Jesus and his disciples were journeying through Samaria on their way to Jerusalem, where Jesus, when he arrives, will bear the cross for the sins of the world. And at this point in the journey, Jesus is met by several would-be disciples. I call them would-be because while they approach Jesus with the intention of joining him in his journey, their intentions are to do so on their terms and not his. Take, for example, this would-be disciple who has just received a call from Jesus to follow in his way. And how does the man respond? "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." And to me, that sounds like a most reasonable excuse. Actually, it's not really an excuse at all. I can't imagine Jesus expecting anyone to leave such an important obligation unfinished or to pass it off to another individual. After all, what does the fifth commandment say? "Honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you." And there is nothing more dishonorable and disrespectful than to fail to give one's parents a proper burial. I know what I would have said if I'd been in Jesus' shoes. I would have told the man, "Well, then you get a pass." But that's not what Jesus said. "Let the dead bury their own dead," is what Jesus told him. "But you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." And on the surface, Jesus' response sounds incredibly callous until you probe deeper. And you see that the man was more than likely offering up nothing more than an award-winning excuse. Because you see, the chances were that the man's father had not yet died. Chances are he was still very much alive, so that the man was simply trying to put Jesus off until it was more convenient for him to embrace Jesus' call. He was willing to follow Jesus on his terms, but he was not willing to follow Jesus on Jesus' terms. And that's why, according to Jesus, by making an excuse, even a championship caliber excuse, such as the one the man had come up with, he was in fact manifesting his own spiritual lifelessness. In other words, by not making the rule of God a priority in his life, the man was on the verge of condemning himself to an everyday experience of meaninglessness and insignificance, but not accepting the invitation to join Jesus in the most important work in the world, well, that man was robbing himself of the chance to experience life in all of its abundance. That's why Jesus told him to go and proclaim the kingdom of God, because joining God in what God is about in our world is to be our ultimate priority in life. Once we get that right, then everything else falls into place. But once we get it wrong, then nothing in life ever works out. I call that a button theology. It's like the buttons on your shirt or on your blouse or your coat or your jacket. If you get the button at the top fastened correctly, then, well, all of the other buttons are no problem. But if you ever get another button fastened in place of that first button, then you end up looking like a disheveled mess. At the end of the day, we fail to be disciples only because we do not decide to be. And when you don't want to do something, well, you'll always find an excuse, even sometimes an excuse that has a pious ring to it. But if you really want to do something, well, you'll find a way. You'll find a way that requires you to do your very best, and if you are a person of faith, to lean upon Jesus in the process so that you make Jesus the ultimate priority in your life. When you really want to follow Jesus, you understand that He alone is the way, the truth, and the life. No one ever comes to the Father but by following hard after Jesus. And if that's not motivation enough for you, then I don't know what else it is that you're really looking for. Thank you for being with me today, and I hope you have a great week. I hope this devotion has encouraged you to make Jesus the first priority of your life and not to allow any excuses to get in the way, so that you experience this week life in all of its abundance. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.